Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of IDRYB Live. I am Lutch, your host, and today we have a very special episode. We are going to be discussing with some friends what should the role of police be in society. So I definitely don't have a good answer to this question. I think anybody who says that they do probably is a little bit too far up their own tuchus. It's a very difficult question. And, I wanted to talk with people across the political aisle. We've got a former cop, we've got an attorney, we've got people of all different walks of life coming in to talk about what do you think the police should be doing? What is their role in society? I think that we all have a pretty good understanding in general what we want from the police. But when we dig into it, it's a much more difficult question to answer. So I personally, I have no idea what our guests are going to bring out, but I personally am not necessarily looking for, okay, well, this this type of policing statistically has these results and this, that. I'm coming at it from more of a cultural and a philosophical perspective. What is it that we should be expecting? And so first to join me is a face you may recognize from previous I Didn't Read Your Book podcast episodes. We have Ryan Bedell. Oh, there we go. Ryan Bedell. Hey. How you doing? Why don't you give a little intro and start us off?
Yeah, that sounds great, Lutch. Do you want me to give my spiel about what I believe about the role of police should play in society, or do you want me to just personal intro?
Why don't we start with the personal intro?
Okay, cool. I'm Ryan Bedell, as Lutch said. It's always great to be here with you, man. Thanks for having me. And I originally met Lutch because I wrote a book called Altar Boy to Atheist Giving Up God. So if you feel like reading a subpar book, by all means, pick that up. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram at RYBEDELL, Rybedell, and I think we're going to have a great conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice, dude. Nice. And then if we have Blake, I'm so sorry, man. Where are you? Where am I? Blake, I'm so sorry, buddy. I was hungover yesterday. It's still coming. We are doing the rest of the case tomorrow. I promise. Real Nathan Daley, some of you guys also may be familiar with, is also joining us here. And again, I am very, very, very excited to have you here. But for those who may not be familiar, who the hell are you?
Listen, first, I just want to say thank you for having me. Truly, truly blessed to be here. I was excited when I heard about the topics. I couldn't wait to jump on. So for those who don't know me, my channel is Real Nathan Daley. My name is Nathan Daley, of course. And I have a YouTube channel. As a 13-year law enforcement veteran, recently retired, you guys decided to start a channel to help bring some insight, some transparency to this profession. This is a very complicated profession. As you know, we're in the news. There's a lot going on when it comes to police relationships in regards to the nation and the citizens. And so my job is just to bring some insight, some behind the scenes knowledge. I've worked extensively throughout law enforcement, different areas, different investigative, I'd say, positions. And, I have a lot to offer you guys on my channel. I speak a lot about these issues. I break them down. I break down and do body camera reviews. And I give people insight on police procedures to have a better understanding. And overall, the objective is to use my channel to rebuild the bridge that was damaged a long time ago. And for the most part, that's pretty much it, man. I have a lot to share, so I'm excited about this topic.
Awesome. So did I mute you by accident? No. Okay. Ryan, I think you're mute. I think you might have muted yourself.
Yeah, I got some street noise here, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't interrupting Nathan.
So yeah, as I was saying, I don't really have a clear answer for this. The question being, what should be the role, or I guess I've rephrased it here, but what role should police play in society? When I'm first thinking about it, I want the police to be on the side of the citizenry. And that I think the attempt has been there to have it work out like that, but because of the nature of the laws and a lot of things that we can get into, that's not always how it plays out. And the job, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan, but the job of a police officer is not to protect and serve specifically, but rather to enforce the law. And I don't know necessarily how I feel about that, because as citizens in a democratic republic, we are the ones who are coming up with these laws. So if there are bad laws on the books and the police job is to enforce those laws, then the question of whose fault or where does blame lie and whose fault is it for what, it gets kind of muddy. So I guess starting off, Nathan, do you have a direct response to that?
Get to that unmute button. Yeah, I think you're the first person I've ever heard say that. I say it all the time. And again, my objective is to bring a lot of truth into this space. The problem with law enforcement is they have a very horrible PR game. The marketing over the last 30, 40 years has been ridiculous. It's not accurate, and it provides a false sense of, I guess you say, reality. The whole idea of policing has been romanticized in this country. And so now when people are seeing real police officers do the job, there's kind of like, hold on, what? This doesn't look like what you've been indoctrinating me on and conditioning me to believe. And so there lies the problem. That is a huge misconception. Officers are not as good as people think they are, as far as training wise, right? Not necessarily good as people per se, but as training, we're just not that great at the job. It's a very difficult job. The reality is you have a lot of officers that are afraid. Fear is a natural human response. And with that comes a lot of issues. And so I tell people all the time, which I'm glad you said that before you can protect and serve is what they were selling people.
Mm-hmm.
Police are here to protect and serve. You have to enforce the laws, right? So there is no protecting and serving without law enforcement. That is our primary duty, not to protect, obviously. And at the same time, the Constitution, well, not the Constitution, but the Supreme Court also stated that police officers are not here for your protection, right? That's not our priority obligation to you, is to protect you. You're in charge and responsible for your own safety. And so when people are hearing that, they are completely, they're shook, they're turned upside down, they have this aha moment, and they're confused because that's what they've been sold. As you know, in this country, we are very good at propaganda. And so, they've made the people believe that is our responsibility, and it's not. Our job, first and foremost, is to enforce the law. So you're absolutely correct.
Ryan, I'd love to get your thoughts on just the question itself, or anything that we've said.
Yeah, I mean, I think I struggle with the need for law enforcement, which is I understand a fairly outlandish thing to say, but bear with me for a second. I think ultimately the police do very little enforcement of the law. I think ultimately they're showing up afterwards when things happen. Everything from theft. I mean, rarely I think and obviously Nathan, you're the expert, so feel free to correct me at any point, but I don't think a lot of robberies are stopped mid-robbery by police. And that's a huge generalization. I'm not going to say that's every instance, but at the same time, how much enforcement of the law is actually happening, even though that's the primary objective of the police force, is my question.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question.
That's actually a great question, and I agree with you. Policing. Now, I will say this. This is what I have to push back on. Policing is absolutely needed. It's absolutely needed. How we use the police needs to change, right? I think Ryan, I think that's what we're going to agree on. One of the biggest problems with law enforcement is that we're being used excessively in areas that are not necessary. I think a lot of times on my channel, I like to tell people that I'm creating a reform package that's actually legit, that'll actually work. And one of those things is reducing the need for officers. I believe personally that over 70% of the 911 calls, or the types of 911 calls that come out, officers should not be responding to. And again, when we look at the situation in Buffalo, New York, we look at the situation now recently in Texas. We had a situation in Milwaukee, California, these mass shootings, and specifically Buffalo. The police officers were present, a whole lot of them, and they didn't do their job. And so, one would argue that this is absolutely 100% what we need the police for that moment right there.
Exactly.
Not the stop sign, right? Not the speeding ticket. If you were ever to be trained to be a police officer, it's for that scenario right there. And I believe that's where we need to start shifting law enforcement. In situations where you have armed gunmen, armed gunwomen, got to be fair. Just people who
or others.
or others. We don't discriminate here. Anybody who wants to create or push any type of act of violence on anybody, regardless of their religion, creed, race, it doesn't matter. Human life, right? A human life. Anyone who's threatening a human life needs to be met with reasonable force in order to stop them from hurting more people. And so the problem is, I always say this, since I trained some officers, and I say, everybody wants to be a cop until it's time to be a cop, right? It's all fun and games until someone's shooting at you, right? It's easy to do this job when everybody complies. It's when the person doesn't comply is when it's time for you to do your job. Now I can pull you over and say, hey, can you sign this ticket? You're like, all right. Those who cooperate, law-abiding citizens are not the problem. It's the people who look at you and say, I'm not going to jail. Sir, you're under arrest. Okay, make me, right? That's when the job really starts. So what you see is people on average, 80% of the time, police officers are not being challenged on their job. And so when someone decides to challenge you, I still remember the first day someone looked at me and said, I'm not going to jail. You're gonna have to earn this. This is what he told me. I'll never forget those words. I was like, well, damn, okay. How are we doing this? And that's the reality. And that's when the job sets in, right? When someone is trying to take your life as an officer and you're trying to put them in custody because they took someone else's life, that's when the job begins, and I've had people try to take my life a few times. And the last time is why I ended up having to retire. And so when the job gets tough, the citizens are looking for officers to step up. And so if you can't step up, then this is not the job for you. And I think a lot of officers have gotten too comfortable being comfortable. And there's no, and there lies the problem, right? So we do need officers, because without officers, you're going to have criminals who are going to act with impunity. Right. So you absolutely need them. We just need to utilize them properly, put them in the right areas, train them better. Less is more when it comes to policing. Right.
Absolutely.
So,
any part of the government.
Correct. Any form of government. So when we look at it, we got approximately 700,000 police officers. I say we can cut them in half and just take the most elite out of the 700,000 and do away with all the shaft, right? Get rid of them.
Interesting.
And use those for serious purposes only. I think it's time that we start telling the people, the citizens, that you're on your own, right? You're on your own. You are responsible for your own safety. If we can get there in time to stop it, if we can get there in time to prevent it, then so be it. But until then, you got about 5 minutes to hold your own until we show up. And I think that changes the mentality of the citizens to start looking at their safety differently, right? This country is no different than any other country overseas in regards to your safety. Anything can happen. That's why people are so discombobulated with all these mass shootings. If they really knew that we have about almost between 500 to 600 a year of these things, the media picks and chooses which one they're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. But these things happen all the time, and the police aren't there to stop it. We come after the fact. The other reason why we need the police is because someone is doing the investigating. Someone still has to do the apprehension, right? So the normal citizen doesn't have the tools or the skill set to investigate and actually locate, because even though the crime was committed, someone does have to go and find them. So yeah, the whole idea is stopping the bleedings, right? So if you have a guy like, say, this guy in Buffalo, or the guy in Texas, if they're just free to walk away, well, then they're going to do the act again. Okay, I'm going to pick another grocery store where there's minorities who are unarmed. I'm going to pick another school where there's minorities that are unarmed. Or I'll pick a school where there's white children, right? Asian children. Then people are going to say, well, who's going to stop them? You know, who's going to stop these people? So we still need it, though. I do agree with you. I think we just need to remarket what it means to be police in this country, and then be honest with the citizens in reference to what they can expect. Right now, the expectations are unrealistic. And I think, to your point, Ryan, you bring up a valid point, and I think it just comes down to remarketing this whole entire profession, to be honest, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, well said. So, Ryan, we have a comment here from Dustin that says, I watch police activity regularly. The stuff they have to deal with is insane. And I think in general, we would all probably agree with that. So with Dustin's comment and with Nathan just said, how does that fit into your perspective that we just don't need cops? I mean, was that something you were kind of just throwing out there? Or do you genuinely believe that the entire industry is not needed?
I think the reason that I phrase it that way is I agree with pretty much everything Nathan said, for starters. I think
we don't need to be kissing his ass. If you disagree, we can disagree.
I'll tell you the parts I disagree on. I think for starters, it is a not intelligent enough way for me to say what I actually think to say we need to get rid of all police, because I agree with Nathan that there does need to be some sort of, whatever you want to call it, crisis response, or if there's an armed gunman or there's something, like you have to be ready for that. There's no way around that. And there's got to be someone who's brave enough to show up when the shooter is at the grocery store. I agree with all of that. I think that is a separate role than someone who's doing the investigating. Why does that need to be the same person? It's a completely different skill set. One person is trained to show up and engage an active shooter. The other person is, obviously out on the field looking at the clues, looking at the investigative stuff, but also probably spending a lot of time behind a desk looking at the facts and trying to figure out what the best course of action is. So, I think the police as they exist right now needs to go away. I think it needs to be completely overhauled, but you called me on it, and I appreciate that, because it's an unfair way to characterize it.
And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to, like I said, we all have this idea of how to answer this question. What role should the police play in society? But again, when we get down to it, it's like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? And again, Nathan was just talking about those 5 minutes. But even if we are to take those two groups of law enforcement and the people who are actively responding to situations, and then let's call it the detective side, where people are looking at things after the fact and trying to catch the criminal, then even if you just take that first group, especially the implication would be that if you think, okay, the responsibility of each person lies within themselves, that doesn't really fit with wanting to ban all guns. And as we've had this conversation before, and I know that you are not really for guns. And so, even if you are walking back that original statement, say we don't need police at all, it's more of just an overhaul. How does that fit in if we're supposed to be taking care of ourselves, but nobody has guns with the cops? How do you see that playing out in a way that would actually work? And I do mean, changing a policy, changing the laws, and anything like that.
Yeah. I don't think we should ban all guns. I don't think I've ever said that. I think assault weapons are not necessarily for the average human being something that they need. That said, it's the thing about guns for me is how easy it is to get them. That's really what it boils down to. And I think having an armed, again, crisis response police, whatever you want to call them, I think language is important. And so when I say abolish the police, I mean what we have right now, not the entire idea of it. But like the way that guns comes into that is that you have less need for an armed police response if there are less guns out there. It's just like,
but the guns aren't going anywhere. The law is just changing.
I disagree. I think,
but the guns are already out there, right?
Theoretically, a lot of the guns. No, not theoretically. Let me finish. Okay. I think a lot of the guns are purchased specifically for the act of a mass shooting. I don't think that they're getting them black market. They're getting them legally. They're getting them through background checks. Same for both of these ones that happened in the last 2 weeks. And that is not to say that it couldn't have happened, that the gunman can't get a gun if they don't go about it legally. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it'd be a lot harder for a guy to carry out a mass shooting if he couldn't legally get a gun. And that is not true, Joe D. George W. Bush lifted it in 2005, but good try.
Okay.
It's a good try.
I did not know that.
I will say this, though. The majority of mass shootings are carried out by handguns. And handguns kill
most of the homicides in general.
Yeah. So,
sure.
So I agree with you in reference to I have guns because I have to have guns, right? But I don't really care for them because I see what they do to people. I'm not a gun junkie or anything like that. I've always felt like the citizens shouldn't have assault rifles, but I've spoken to people who are military and people who are, strong constitutionalists, right? And they'll tell you why they feel like they need to have this somewhat equal to firepower as the government, just in case the government becomes tyrannical. I get the argument. Unfortunately, right, we can't assume, shout out to you, Daryl. Unfortunately, we can't assume that people are going to be mature enough to handle power, right? When you give it to them. I think This is an age-old crisis. You give somebody power. The idea is that guns don't kill people, people kill people. You don't need a gun to create mass murder, right? You could do it with the vehicle, you could do it with the knife, you could do it with explosives. And so with that being said, there's a multitude of ways that people terrorize citizens in this country. And assault rifles will never change that. People will find other ways to do it, right? They'll do something to the water, they'll do something to the food.
Sure.
Yeah, remember that dude in Cali who tried to spike the whole thing with LSD? That actually probably would have been a good thing. Just kidding. But
people would have been star tripping for sure.
Is it not a worthwhile argument that getting rid of the one thing takes
Hold on really quick. I want to shout out Daryl. Thank you so much for subscribing. I really appreciate that. And thank you guys, everybody, for watching. I'm sorry, Ryan.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm pretty easygoing. I'm not easily offendable, but I think it's a fair argument still to say that just because people might find another way to do it doesn't mean you shouldn't take the option off the table.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. The question is, if you know the type of people who live in this country, I'm curious to know how you plan on executing that. Now, I like ideas. I love Harry Potter. I love reading the books, right? I love being in fairy tale land.
I was just,
So the question is, though, in theory, yes, it sounds very good. It sounds beautiful. But in practice, you have to show me something realistic.
Sure.
Now, but like our brother just said, he said, how are you going to get rid of the guns? These guns, people are now making guns, right? They're making 3D
printing.
Guns. They're printing them now.
The assault rifle.
Yeah. So actually, since you bring that up, and as does Joe D, why don't we get a clear definition on what exactly is an assault rifle? Because I've heard that used in very many different ways. And just to even preface a little bit further, I used to be right there with you, Ryan. I used to be super anti-gun, and I just realized that I just don't really know that much about guns. I only held a gun for the first time a couple months ago. But yeah, what does either of you have a definition of what is an assault rifle versus another type of rifle?
Nathan's the expert. I grew up around guns. I'm from Missouri. I grew up in a hunting capacity for guns. So it was very much like that was not something that I interacted with regularly. So I will pass off to the expert. I'm happy to give what I think the definition is, but I'm not going to tell you it's right.
Since you brought it up first, Ryan,
sure,
I am going to hold you to that. What did you mean by assault rifle when you said it?
Yeah, I mean, a weapon that is meant for an assault. Literally, like its purpose is to have chaos. Large magazine, high fire rate. That's the purpose of the weapon in my mind.
Okay, and Nathan, how would you define that?
I always look at it as long-barreled military style weapon used with rapid fire and high-capacity magazine. But I think we should. To just clarify, go to a direct definition so that everybody is aware. And
ask and I shall receive.
There we go.
So assault rifle, a rapid fire, magazine fed automatic rifle designed for infantry use. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 parts there. So it has to be rapid fire. So that takes out anything that is semi-automatic. Do we agree on that?
Yeah.
Magazine fed. I know there's a difference between a clip and a magazine, but I don't know what that difference is. Do either of you?
Yeah, they're the same. It's used interchangeably depending on who you're talking about. A magazine, a clip.
Okay.
Yeah.
I already know where you're going with this, Lutch. You're about to circle back to the AR-15, aren't you?
No, I'm just I'm not trying to trap any. I literally am just trying to have the conversation. And Joe brought up the question. And I think it's important because in a lot of these conversations, you know, the some of these terms, I think even military style is used very loosely. I don't again, not as a I'm not being facetious. Like I said, I'm very new to the gun world. I don't know what military style means. And so the last part of this is designed for infantry use. So the you know, since you brought it up, the AR was not made for the military. It is a consumer weapon. And so then it's not an assault rifle by those means. And then even when you talk about assault rifles, as Nathan mentioned earlier, most of the mass events are done by handguns. And so Joe D is coming in and saying select fire. That's the difference. Yeah. So what you could choose to have it semi, burst, or full auto. I guess that's what makes a full assault rifle. And then Dustin says these assault rifles he's speaking of are regular semi-automatic rifles, much like a hunting rifle. The mass shootings are not done with fully automatic rifles. They are done with semi-automatic. People think the black guns are more dangerous. It is the same. And finally, that Dustin also adds fully automatic rifles are not available to civilians unless they get them illegally. I do think there are some workarounds, but by and large, I think he is correct that you can't just have anything beyond one bullet. And of course, there was the whole bump stock thing. But
well, let me add some pushback though,
please,
because you can modify these guns. Right. So what is my issue with the AR-15 or, you know, AKs and all those kind of things? The issue is the type of round that are used, right? The 226, 223s and the 5.56, right? Those rounds are, you know, you could pierce through, of course, pretty much any vest, any law enforcement vest, any civilian vest. And so shout out to you, Joe. And so again, this is the issue, right? It's more so the round. Now you have handguns that can shoot, you know, rifle rounds as well.
That's a great point as well.
So it's the firepower to me, because it brings in it changes the game. Now I think people are a little bit more fearful when the long barrel guns, because not only that, you can actually touch people from several yards away as well, right? The accuracy on it, you can snipe people with it. So it is covered under hunting, right? They make that argument. The NRA makes the same argument that, hey, these are hunting, and I get it. I'm not mad at it, right? We're talking about, should the civilians have access to that level of firepower? From my personal perspective, I don't think so. I've always felt that way, because I've seen evil people use those weapons to do harm on others, and it's not necessary. Those weapons are supposed to be used for protection by the people. And then also to protect them from government. But again, you can make the argument. So I'm okay either way. I think the troubling part about it at the end of the day is, how do you get the evil people from getting access to anything that's going to do mass harm? That's the question. Because you'll always have access to people who can get these things black market. The black market is a very real thing. People are getting guns very easily as long as they're willing to pay for it. So we'll never stop it, right? People are printing guns now, so we'll never stop it. The question is, how do we reduce it? I think that's fair. And then how do we hold those people accountable when they do things they should not be doing? You know,
Nathan, you said it so much better than it has ever been communicated to me. in the sense that I think assault rifle is a great buzzword, and I think it creates a conversation, but it's really about the firepower in whatever form it comes in. It's about the damage that is able to be done less than the weapon itself.
Yes, I agree. Yep, I agree. And that's the issue I have with it. Yeah.
And the fact that, again, even it's not just plastic guns that are able to be 3D printed these days. The metal is being used for in these machines. And again, I don't know much about 3D printing, but it's very short amount of time before you can legitimately 3D print a full gun as a gun. So Dustin here says, fair point, Nathan. However, modifying these guns is illegal. Tell me again how the stricter laws will help.
That's a great question. And, I'm not necessarily for stricter gun laws. I'm more so for gun laws that make sense. And so, yes, you can modify. See, the problem is not law-abiding citizens. The problem are criminals. Laws do not apply to criminals. That's what makes them criminals, right? So whatever law you come up with, it doesn't matter to a person who doesn't care, right? For us on the panel right now, if someone creates a law, we are like, we want to be outstanding citizens, right? We want to help and do our part as citizens, law-abiding citizens. We are going to follow instructions. Well, criminals are like, the hell with your instructions. I want to do what I want to do. That's what makes them criminals. Well, who holds criminals accountable? The police, right? Not you, Ryan. Not you, Lutch, right? That's not your job.
Nope. Hell no.
And so criminals know that there's only one person in this country that's going to hold them accountable. The police, the criminal justice system, prison, right? Whether we like the way it's set up or not, that is the only person they fear, along with other citizens that can protect themselves, right? But what about those who can't protect themselves, right? These are who the criminals go after. They don't go after the armed, right? So to his point, he is correct. He said it's illegal to do it. Well, the criminals don't care that it's illegal. That's why they're criminals. So that argument within itself, I always tell people, doesn't matter. People say, well, it's illegal to have a stolen gun, right? It's illegal to shave the barrel off, right? The rifle or the shotgun.
But to be fair on the other side, because again, I am not. This is the one issue where I can genuinely, the one political issue where I can genuinely come in and really not take a side. Everything else, I really do have a set position, and there's some things that I'm more movable and less movable on. But because I'm so new to learning about this stuff, I'm very happy to play both sides. And you're not going to stop murder. No. If somebody is hell-bent on murder. But that is not a good reason to legalize murder. So I get that side of it. And, so Joe D says, removing a category of weapons does what? They will do it with a pistol carbine weapon. Again, I don't even really know exactly what that means, but that is still not exactly a good reason to say, well, they're going to do it anyway, so let's just let them do it.
Well, you got to make things illegal in order to discourage people from doing it. The whole idea is to reduce it, right? We want to reduce it. You'll never get rid of it. But if 100% of people can have an assault rifle, right, then okay. And if we're saying that assault rifles are an issue, and we're saying this is a problem, and if we say you can't have assault rifles, that's going to reduce it down to the criminals. Right? Because the average everyday me, you, and Ryan, guess what? We're not willing to go to prison for it. Right? It's not that serious to us. Right? You might have one as a keepsake. You might keep it in your house. You'll never leave the house with it. Right? But if whatever reason the police come by and they do a search warrant and they find one and it's a minimum 2 years, guess what? Right? You're going to ask yourself, people who have something to lose don't commit crimes. So now here's the point though. People who love it, they love it. I agree. You're going to be hard pressed to get rid of it. Alcohol was illegal and people did it illegally. And when they got caught, they got held accountable, right? It's a judgment call, you guys. You got to be willing to take your risk, right? There's a theory that we use called the rational theory, right? What do criminals do? They rationalize their decisions before they do them.
We do that too.
We all do it. So as citizens, if you feel like it's worth the risk, then that's on you. Right? It's no different than drinking and driving.
You're driving at 5 miles over the speed limit.
And yes, exactly. If you decide to do it and take the risk, it's on you. You know the laws. So again, I think it's a individual decision that you have to sit with. Do you love your freedom more than you love your guns? So now say they do that, right? Say they do decide to reduce it. I'm neither for it or against it. I just know the damage that it causes, right? So here's my thoughts on it. Because to everybody's point, even if you were to ban the guns, the problem is the criminals are still going to try their best to get access to it because it is a more superior firepower. Again, this happened in Los Angeles during the famous bank robbery. And the police were outgunned. All they had were like revolvers, right? And guess what? The criminals had assault rifles, right? They had AR-15s. I can't remember what kind of guns they had, but they had assault rifles. And they couldn't do anything, right? The bullets were penetrating the vehicles, striking officers, going through their vests. They had no level of defense. These guys were armored all the way from head to toe. The rifle is the only thing that's going to stop them. The Buffalo, New York shooting, the officer had a pistol, and old dude had a rifle, right? That's a superior firepower. They're not on the same platform as a handgun, as we all know that. I think a lot of people just like the rifle because it's sexy, right? Let's just be honest. It looks cool. It looks good when you have the whole monkey suit on. It makes you feel like you have more power than you actually do, and let's just be real. That's what it is. Because every time I see these guys marching around on the streets with it, they want to be commando warriors, right? At the end of the day, what is the purpose of a gun? This has become more of a challenge against the government than it is against people's real safety. People don't really believe all that tyrannical government. The government's taking guns.
I agree.
After the shooting happened with Buffalo, and then now in Texas, you guys, gun sales went up 30%. They do this every year, every 2 years. And then guess what? They did it over the pandemic. Gun sales went through the roof. People made the threats about guns being taken away. They'll never go and take the guns out of the hands of the people. They can't do it. They will never do that. But people believe it. Why? Because they play on our fear. They play on our fear and they use propaganda to do it. And it's an age-old capitalism technique used to get funding and money and increase your revenue, right? And profits.
I love you, dude. You're speaking my language so
hard.
Love you
too, Ryan. Love you too.
I literally just went to my phone and followed you. I was like, man, I need to get some more of this guy.
Appreciate it, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, channel link is in the description.
Yes.
So I think we all kind of have a pretty much similar type of perspective on what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, and what exact policies need to go there. Might be different, Brian.
I think it's important that we all agree there is a problem, because you could definitely have people on this panel who would tell you there's no problem at all, and it's even. I mean, in the face of however many 20 kids dying in Texas, they had the NRA convention down the road, and I think it's. I think it is.
Please do, Dustin. Please do.
Yeah. I think it is immoral that we do nothing. I'm not saying I have the exact answer or that I know I'm the smartest person in the room and I think we need to just take everybody's guns away and all that, which I think is what people think someone like me is like. If we're going to ban assault rifles, I don't think you go into people's homes and take them. I think you ban the sale of them and hope that doing so stops a certain degree of mass shootings from happening. You're not going to stop all of them. We all agree on that. I don't know. I think it's the government thing. I think is hilarious. If the U.S. government wants to do anything to us, they have the power to do it. Regardless of whether I got an assault rifle in my house, if the government decides I'm the person of interest today, I'm going down.
That goes to the exact notion of that's not just because the government has, nukes or whatever, doesn't mean that, look at Waco. There was a whole thing there because there was a standoff and it didn't necessarily end well. But the fact is that you're able to, there's been many smaller incidents like that where it's not the entire U.S. Military coming down on you at once that you need the guns for. I mean, just look at the the differences between what places like China or Australia were doing over Rona, and that was not even tried here. And I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know. I don't have an eye or ear in the White House, but it very much seems like that is why, because we had an armed populace.
Okay.
But I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of guns, because I know we could talk about that all day.
Brief
Did you want to?
theoretical question about
Sure,
the government thing. So how many officers or soldiers does it take dying before the government just drone strikes the house where somebody is holding out? It's a serious question.
That is a good question.
That is a good question.
The gun's a great thing to have if it's just them, but the government has the capability to literally take you out on a dime's notice. We don't have the power to fight the government.
I mean, if the situation, so let's say there is a smaller Waco-like situation.
Sure.
And so let's just say it's a handful of people and there's a standoff. Then the reason that Waco went on for so long wasn't because they didn't have the firepower to level that house.
Agreed.
It's because of the optics of just going in and, rolling over a house with women and children in it. So again, that's maybe not the best example, but it is an example.
I guess my question stands. What's the number?
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. That is a very good point. Dustin had an earlier comment that I thought might refocus us a little bit more on the thing at hand, the question at hand, because again, as much as the gun conversation is super interesting, I could go all day on that. I really do want to dig into what the hell are police for. So Dustin says, I am curious if Nathan has anything to say about intelligence-led policing. Is that a better method to focus on? And just to add on to that, what is intelligence-led policing? And is that a better method than what?
Yeah, I was going to ask him, what does he mean by, I don't want to answer incorrectly, but what does he mean specifically in reference to intelligence-led policing? I kind of have an idea, but I want to be clear we're on the same wavelength before I give my statement. Dustin, so if you could clarify.
Yeah, please do.
And on the lines, while he's doing that, on the lines of do we need the police? I think, honestly, I believe the people have power. The people have all the power. And I believe, honestly and truly, that the people should decide how policing should look like in this country, right? As officers, we are servants to the people. It's we the people at the end of the day. I'm not above that. I swore an oath to the people. My allegiance is to officers, but my oath and my loyalty is to the people. And that's how it should be. And that's how it's supposed to be taught. And I think we've gotten away from that because power has a funny way of making you feel more important than you are, right? And this is the issue we have in government in general, right? We've lost sight of what our objective is, to serve. We are servants. I'm a servant to you guys here on the panel, which is why it's so easy for me to come on YouTube and really speak truth to what's going on. And every now and then I get my little emotions in there, right? We're all human. But the reality is, at the end of the day, what is the priority? What do the citizens want? Right? How do they want law enforcement to look like? Now, we can't be disingenuous and say take all the guns from the police, right? Let's be real, right? But we can say is how we go about utilizing this force that we have in this country to better serve the people. And that's my issue. I think we're not listening to the people. And at the end of the day, if you have a community, if you have a city, and they say that they feel like they can serve themselves, or they want to privatize policing for their community, then that's their personal business, right? If they don't want to use the services of the state or the county or the sheriff, that's their business. Now, of course, you're going to have to come in on certain things, but when we're talking about regular, Ryan, and I'm curious what you think about this, but regular 911 calls, unless it's something involving a crime against the state per se, or of course a constitutional violation to that effect. But every day, hey, my neighbor threw a rock at my yard. Hey, me and my wife got into it, or something to that effect. The citizens need to decide if they can manage these things on their own, so be it, right? Maybe we only respond to we call this in law enforcement, the 7 deadly sins, right? The 7 deadly sins. Maybe we can reduce law enforcement to only dealing with the 7 deadly sins. Right. And then we leave it up to the citizens to deal with property crime issues. Right. I believe that in my reform idea, I also look at having cities have their own security force that handles, traffic accidents, traffic violations, where police don't do those things anymore. Right. Unless it's a crime or a violation where someone's injured, on someone's DUI, then you will call and send an officer out. But on regular accidents and track violations, they're not necessary.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's see what he's saying here.
So yeah, getting back to Dustin's comment about intelligence-led policing. For example, if there's a series of carjackings in a specific neighborhood, patrol that neighborhood for carjackers specifically.
I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Nathan.
No,
go ahead. I was going to say, I think the language is important there because hotspot policing is incredibly effective.
Yes.
It is very, very effective, and there's no debating that.
And what exactly is hotspot policing?
Sure. So let's say there's been, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Nathan, again, there's a series of carjackings in a neighborhood, so you put police there. That's hotspot policing. It's a hotspot for crime. It's somewhere where the threat has been lined out, and so you respond to it. I think my issue comes in with general patrolling. Like, I think 100% it makes sense if there's a pattern of crime happening in an area to respond to it. I don't necessarily think that it should be the police's role to roam the streets looking for crime.
That's interesting. I think I partially agree and I partially disagree. And I say because criminals roam.
Sure.
Criminals roam, right? They're nomadic, one would argue, right? That they're not stationary. And so I think your statement is more so along the lines of kind of the roaming and harassment, right? Kind of like
to a degree. I mean,
to a degree, right?
Well, let me see if I can tie this in a little bit because it would like the stop and frisk type of policing. Is that kind of what you're talking about with the roaming, where they don't need to be going out looking for criminals, or are you even just talking about patrolling the streets for traffic stops and stuff?
I mean, in my mind, well, do you want me to talk about stop and frisk specifically, or like?
Well, I mean,
philosophy?
when you were
those are separate. Let me clarify what Ryan is saying real quick. Ryan is more so thinking about it from like he doesn't like police hunting for criminals, right? And we do hunt, and I was a hunter, right? I was definitely a hunter and a gatherer, right, of criminals, and I enjoyed it. I think the problem with policing is not so much the technique or the tactics, it's the abuse, right? It's never the technique. It's never the tool, right? Like it's never the gun. It's the person. It's always the officer. It's never the actual technique. People are tired of officers abusing the power that the citizens have given them. I think that's where the real root problem is that needs to be addressed.
Very well said.
But to your point though, Ryan, I do understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, you do need officers to be hunters. You just need them to be professional hunters. You need them to be respectful. You need them to be more knowledgeable on the law. I think those are the things that are absent, right? If you got right now, we got some officers that are just a bunch of wild canines out here, right? And they're biting innocent people, right? And this is the problem. They're violating the rights of innocent people. The issue with the spot crime or hot spot crime prevention tactics, it works. It's very effective. I will say this. I've worked in a predominantly white community and I've worked in a predominantly black community. The difference, one loved you there and the others did not, right? I'll let you decide which one you think it was. The thing is, in the white community, they wanted you to patrol. They wanted to see the cars. If they didn't, they complained. They say, hey, we don't see any officers riding through here. They want to see it because it gives them a sense of security.
Never in my life.
Yeah. And so, but there are some communities where it's high crime sometimes. And even if it's not high crime, the mere presence of an officer consistently gives the impression that you're there looking for something or that you are there looking to harass. I think one of the biggest problems in law enforcement is the perception. And again, it doesn't take much, right? If we're looking at two separate communities, right? If I'm looking at the black community, sometimes the presence of officers there too much, people are uncomfortable because they have a distrust for law enforcement. But then I can go right into the white community or the Asian community and they're throwing flowers when I drive by.
But the crime rate's also lower in a lot of those places.
Yes. And again, when you go into a high crime area or an area where it's below middle class, lower class, The poverty's there. People have a different type of perception of police. They're constantly feeling like police are out to get them. And so this is true in poor white communities. This is also true in poor Black communities as well. Now, I will also say, I love the caveat, is that there are also people in all ranks or all tiers of these communities that love and desire the police present, right? Because the ones who are calling 911 in any of these tiers, whether low, middle, or high income class, they're all the same skin color, right? Whether they're white or Black. And I always tell people, especially when I'm talking to people from my community specifically about these issues, is that you say you don't want the police there, but there's a Black woman, there's a Black man that's calling 911 against another person who's Black, right? So we have to be real about the conversation and talk about the root problem, which is the individual officer or poor police practices in that department that need to be addressed and rooted out.
I want to briefly, and I know we got to introduce Duncan. Sorry, give me 1 second, Duncan. I want to push back on that in two places.
All right.
One, I agree 100% that so much of it, I think, is socioeconomic. I think across a lower socioeconomic class, distrust of law enforcement is there, partially because when you are of a lower socioeconomic class, you have to struggle more and you're more likely to turn to crime because you need to put food on your table. You need to live and you're not given the resources to do so. So I think there are obviously problems that contribute to how we view the police that are completely outside of the police themselves. And I think that's one of the things I mean when I'm talking about like a root causes thing, right? So like you want to talk about crime in a neighborhood, there's crime there for a reason. And that reason needs to be addressed as well as the police response to it, for sure. So when people say things to me like all cops are terrible and have the worst intentions possible, I don't think the police force in its current form should exist, but I'm also not naive enough to think that every police officer is a terrible person. So there's a middle ground somewhere between fixing the societal problems and changing this idea that, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. I want to push back on the other thing. Sorry.
We'll definitely get back to it.
No, go ahead. I'm writing these down as you go.
Sure.
I have to grab some, but I'm listening. I think. Go ahead. I'm gonna write it down.
I just wanted to push back on the word hunter really quick.
Okay.
Because
I have a lot to say about this hotspot policing and all of this. So let's dive right back into that. Let's give Duncan the floor.
First, yeah.
Who are you, Duncan? You may know we've got somebody in the house who knows Duncan. You may know him as the Jersey pot lawyer, but the floor is yours. Introduce yourself. Who are you? And who are you?
Oh, you're muted, my friend.
There we go. Oh,
now you just need to click the microphone button. We definitely heard it before that.
Yeah, now there you go.
You got me?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right.
Ditch the headphones. Hey, I'm Duncan Delano, also known as the Jersey Pot Lawyer on Instagram. I am a commercial real estate and cannabis attorney in New York and New Jersey. Been practicing law for over 10 years in a variety of areas, including one summer doing criminal defense work. And I work at a firm called Emerge Law Group. We're a full service business firm, but with strong emphasis in cannabis and psychedelics. And navigating the complex legal landscape there. A lot of people get into cannabis law through criminal defense law. And a lot of my current clients, I help clients in New York and New Jersey apply for and get licenses to operate in the newly regulated market. And a number of my clients are from what we call the legacy market, the black market, the unregulated market, that are now coming into the regulated market. And there are incentives to do that in both New York and New Jersey with people with marijuana convictions getting priority in the application process. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, and excited to join this conversation and hope to add a little bit of the legal perspective, the law perspective.
Nice to meet you, Duncan.
Nice to
Yeah,
meet
so we were talking, we had talked a little bit about guns, and we were getting into hotspot policing. But what I would love to hear is just your raw reaction to the question at hand: what role should the police play in society?
So what I wrote down was protect and serve, which is kind of the obvious answer. But I think if you just kind of stay true to that, that's the goal, is to protect and serve, and not punish or discriminate or use unnecessary force. I think there's so much that goes into that. I think of community policing as so much more effective. My wife's a social worker and has worked with people with focused a lot of her career on people with co-occurring mental health and substance abuse issues. And she knows that someone who is going through a mental health crisis, or is under the influence of a substance, can't be addressed the same way. That sort of tough guy, strong arm, by the book, by the textbook, by the police school training mantra of approaching that situation is not the right way to do it, and ends with someone getting hurt or worse, and at the very least unnecessarily swept up into the legal system. And I think we can't talk about this question without really talking about the whole criminal justice system, because this is one piece, and the whole thing is a vicious cycle that all kind of with for-profit prisons and having to pay for bail, all this stuff, just creates a place where it's very hard to, once you're in the system, get out of it.
Well said. Well said. So diving back into specifically this conversation about hotspot policing, or going to where the crime is. I also agree with you, Ryan, that this is a very effective way of doing things. Find out where the crime is happening and go to the crime. And instead of, just having, looking after the fact to prevent crimes from happening in the first place. Again, knowing that you are further to the left than I am on the political spectrum, I wonder how it rubs you that we can see from the numbers that, as you were just talking about lower income areas, and that also has a high correlation with minority areas where minorities live, and that's where statistically we see most of the crime happening. And so how does that not get into profiling and stuff like that? If you're wanting the police to go to these areas that they're going there because there's more crime.
I didn't say that.
I know you didn't say that, but I'm saying, if you are looking at the statistics of where the crime happens, it's in low income areas, and it's in minority areas. Yeah. Not exclusively, of course, but in the context of what we're talking about. So I'm just curious as to how.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think there's a multitude of reasons. And I'm not saying bad black people, bad poor people. That's not what I'm saying. But again, we're talking about policing, and if there's terrible reasons for why crime occurs in this area, but crime is still occurring in this area, to your point about hotspot policing. I feel like that would have the optics of, hey, the police are profiling. They're going to these places where they know poor and minority people are, and specifically looking for them.
So what I said and let me clarify. Hotspot policing is an incredibly effective tool in that it works. Not that I necessarily agree with it.
Okay.
I think
so. Why would you want? So there's something that works, but it may not be a good thing. Where's the?
Sure. So I think, sort of going back to what Duncan just said, what's the purpose of police? In my mind, it's harm reduction, and that's it. Period. I mean, whether it's enforce the rules or whatever it might be, law enforcement or protect and serve, all the other stuff. We say those words because ultimately we want there to be a problem that is fixed or resolved. Harm reduction. Period. And one of the reasons I disagree with the idea of a police officer as a hunter for crime is that there's not always a harm committed by a crime. I think if I go 5 miles per hour per over the speed limit, generally I'm not harming anyone. And that's not to say there isn't a speed limit for a reason. But I think oftentimes there's sort of as, sorry, I don't remember the name of the guy in the chat. What was, he said, Dustin, yes, excuse me. I got confused with Duncan. My apologies.
Is this the one you're talking about?
Dustin, yes. I agree. Discretion should play a big role in it because not every crime is the same. Murder is different than me stealing a loaf of bread to save my life, literally to have food on the table. And I think the point you made about socioeconomic issues in these minority communities is a big piece because they're chronically underfunded. They're chronically discriminated against. And when you start to fix those problems, the hotspot policing, which is effective in stopping crime, becomes less of a necessary thing. Does that make sense? Sometimes I feel like I just goes off.
So let me see if I understand what you mean. That yes, if we are to right now just say, okay, go to where the crime is, then because of the other factors that we largely probably would agree about, but definitely some that we wouldn't, but the outside factors that cause the correlation of crime to happen in these areas isn't the fault of those people
at all. It's not. Everyone's responsible for their own decisions. Right. I will not say that someone's not at fault for a decision that they make. That said, some decisions are more easier made when you're put in a position of pressure.
Absolutely. But again, that goes back to the idea that the police is that the job of law enforcement to determine which laws are to be enforced and which aren't? Or do we want police who are more by the book and we as a populace do a better job of having a better book for them to work from?
I don't disagree with that in theory. I think for even a large group of citizens to change the book, it is incredibly difficult. And we are seeing that with cannabis. Cannabis has been around for quite a long time. And Duncan, you're the expert. So if I say anything out of line, by all means, correct me. But it's the way that it is policed, the way that it is regulated. Like there are a lot of people, most people, I think at this point, who agree that there's a problem with how we look at cannabis, but it hasn't had a federal change. And for what reason? I mean, we haven't even looked on a state level in a lot of states, I think changing the book is a nice idea. It's the way I would put it.
Well, I think it's a big idea. And I think it applies in so many areas that it requires, it's a multifaceted thing. There's not one bad law. There's not one bad politician. There's problems all over. But the question again is, are the laws are what they are today? So today, what are we expecting from our police especially if we don't agree with the laws? So as particularly, I think marijuana is a good example of what you were talking about when you were saying that not all crimes have cause harm. And drug crimes are, especially low-level drug crimes, are probably the closest to a victimless crime that you can get. I mean, I would call it victimless if you want to, say that you yourself are the victim for, whatever. But Duncan, I'm curious, how from your perspective and working with clients who either have been arrested or now clients who are going through the process of trying to do everything by the book. On the last time we saw you, you went through and how extensive the work is and how to the T everything has to be. And I think that's what is perpetuating the gray market of marijuana, at least in New Jersey. I'm curious your thoughts on where the police could come in and either help or hurt on that front.
Yeah, I think, I think in general, sort of laws, as we learn in law school, laws collectively are supposed to sort of represent our collective, sense of our mores, like, our morals as a species. They're supposed to sort of reflect that and guide that. And, marijuana has been illegal because of like a stigma and misguided war on drugs and all sorts of other things for over, about a century. And before that, it was completely medicine. And now finally, it seems like state by state, we're deciding that, oh, that's right. We as a society don't think that is a harmful crime, this is actually a very helpful plant, and can really, really help a lot of people. So let's legalize it. So we're that's sort of our stamp of, okay, as a society, that makes it okay. But that being said, I do believe in police discretion. I think they should exercise discretion, and not enforce. That's part of, sort of being a human and being a member of our society, rather than some, robot that just blindly enforces laws. Trying to think of that Sylvester Stallone movie. That was such a badass movie back in the day, where they just issued tickets when you swear.
Judge
Dredd. Judge Dredd. There
Judge
you go.
Dredd.
So we want police but I want police that are trained the right way, that are members of the community, that know their community members, and that exercise discretion and not enforce the law to the T. They have that. They legally have that discretion, just like prosecutors have the discretion not to prosecute. And they should 100% exercise that. That's part of the point. But I think it only works if they're trained the right way, and they have the right funding and the right resources and teams of experts, and good citizen oversight in some shape or form.
Right. I was just about to do that.
So I think it's sort of building all of that together that makes it workable.
Yes. I was just about to say that the importance of oversight. The discretion's fine, but if there's no oversight, it means nothing. Because the problem is the discretion, right? When the discretion is used inappropriately, when it's used unequally, unjustly, then that becomes an issue. The problem with policing and the criminal justice system is that there's too much power throughout the system, and there's no checks and balances. There's no oversight. And people are saying, hey, we need citizen oversight. And they're like, no, we don't, right? The profession does not want citizen oversight. Why is that? We've got a taste of the power for too long. Policing should have never been created without citizen oversight. And now you have departments who have gone generation to generation of just unwavering power, right? To the point where the government can't even fight against some police unions. Like, that's how disgusting it's gotten. It's gotten bad. People who have the right heart as attorneys, prosecutors, officers, people who work in corrections, they're doing the job for the right reasons. We're overshadowed by those who don't. And those who don't are usually in more positions of power to bring about the change that they don't want to happen, because then they would have to relinquish a level of power. And this is the issue, right? So, again, the tools are not the problem. The tool user is the problem, and again, Duncan brought a good point that it doesn't just stop with policing. When you go into the courts, because it's police courts and corrections, when you go into the courts, that's a whole nother threshold of power that even myself don't have access to. And it's a different war game in there, right? It's adversarial in there. And you have some people, they enforce the law, or I would say they interpret the law through their egos, right? As you have officers who will enforce laws through their egos, you have people who will use their correctional power through their ego. And this is the problem. How do you get that out? You expose and give access to the citizens. The citizens need to have complete access to how power is being enforced on them. And they need to be able to change it at will. As society changes, so does the structure of the criminal justice system. Now, there's one thing that you guys did say that I have to slightly disagree with. Right?
Go for it.
We talk about
this. Get bloody.
Yeah, let's go to war. Let's go to war on the panel. You guys are mentioning they're harmless crimes. I have to beg to differ. I don't think there's any such thing as a harmless crime. There's crimes against society. We can see that.
Oh, it's legal now.
Right. We can see that there's harms against society and there's harms against a person. But one would argue that as you start to harm society, quote unquote, you are then impacting and affecting those who live in society, well, therefore you're creating harm against people who have to be in that environment. So if we talk about something as simple as marijuana, I'll tell you a story, right? We had a guy who was just a regular guy, just wanted to sell his marijuana, right? He didn't want to bother anybody, right? So he sold, and he sold like he never sold before, right? And granted, people get high. Listen, I'm not mad at it. I'm neither for it or against it, right?
Sorry.
neither for it against it. If that's what you do, that's what you do, right? And I have my personal views on it. But this is what happened. Somebody was watching him sell from his apartment. He decided to move one day, and a nice innocent family moved in behind him. Unfortunately, somebody decided to kick in his door that day, a day after he had already left, right? Tied up the innocent family that had nothing to do with it. What were they looking for? The marijuana. So though it's harmless, right? One would argue that it's the nexus behind these actions, right? We say prostitution is a harmless crime, right? Listen, if you want to sell yourself to somebody else and you just happen to want to be a buyer, then that's your personal business. It doesn't bother me. It only hurts the people. It only impacts the people who are engaged in it, right? So now, but here's the problem. It's the pimp, right, who is hiring this prostitute. Now, your daughter decides she wants to be a little rebellious and run away from home. She come across a guy named a pimp named Slickback, right? Shout out to those who watch Boondocks, right? So she comes across a pimp who's like, man, listen, sweetie, it's nothing, right? I got you. I'll pay for this, pay for that. If you do this little favor for me, right? Go ahead into this hotel room and do this and do that. Rub this guy's back, rub his feet, give you $100. She does it, right? 3 Johns later, she's doing things that she would never imagine she would do, right? And so again, we create an environment where we say, this is okay, right? This is harmless. It's not in the moment, right? We're talking about the projection. We're talking about the nexus between these actions. And when you start discouraging behaviors that don't look good or society deems as not appropriate, it does help. It does help keep society cleaner, keeps the environment cleaner. It protects the new seeds that are being formed, being placed in that soil. And I will say this, because it's no different than alcohol, right? There are laws and regulations put on alcohol. One would say public drunkenness is not a big deal until that drunk walks in front of a moving car, right? So again, or he gets in behind a car wheel and he's driving and he kills somebody else. So I agree with that these are crimes that we might need to address differently. We might in some way decriminalize them in a way, but to say that they're harmless, I have to disagree with that.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, but I think that's a bit of a straw man of what we're trying to say is a harmless crime. If you take each of those examples, you took the low level and you went to the next level. So I don't think anybody here would. I mean, maybe, but the idea of being a drug dealer is a very different thing than being just some guy who sits at home and smokes his own weed.
But if you legalize it, it wouldn't matter, right?
Well, and this is what Dustin was saying. He said if it was completely legal, and I guess this goes for marijuana or prostitution. If it was completely legal and regulated, the street dealer wouldn't need to have it. I can't read it that small. Wouldn't need to have it in his unsecured home, and people may not be going to rob him if there's no black market for it. And even I definitely agree with that. But again, when in the examples that you used, you weren't talking about the guy who's sitting at home smoking weed. You're talking about the guy who's selling the weed. You weren't talking about the girl who's selling her body. You're talking about the pimp who's creating that danger. And so I don't think that we're saying that in these areas there is no harm done, period. What we're saying is that there are things on the books that are crimes that don't create any harm. And I don't think any of the things that you listed are things that we would say are harmless. I mean, unless you guys disagree.
Well, and I would say, like, in the aggregate, it sounds, some of what you were saying is like in the aggregate, even some of these harmless crimes become harmful because of their larger effects when you sort of aggregate the whole thing that's going on.
Correct.
Whereas like one person consuming an illicit drug by themselves, harming no one, obviously that one crime is harmless, and should be, addressed with, treatment more than policing.
Or not, just left alone.
No, you can't leave them alone because these people OD, right? So and
that's where community policing, they should be, coming and getting the guy help and not arresting him.
Decriminalizing, I think, is one thing. I think, but people, we forget that these drugs have to get here from somewhere. Someone has to pay for it. It's not free, right? So when you start looking at the business of drugs, it's very criminal in nature because these drugs have to come from somewhere and people are willing to die for it. It costs money, right? It's not so we like to look at it as, oh, it came across our coffee table, but we don't ever pay attention to how it got there, right? There's a underbelly to society that we're not looking and paying attention to, right? And so again, it seems harmless on the outside, but how it got here is a totally different story. Right?
It is a different story, and it should be treated differently. Is exactly my point. Is that I completely agree that you can't get into the drug game without touching other areas of illegal or at least illicit activity. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But you absolutely. And let's not even use weed because hello, Princessa. Nice to have you. Let's not even use weed because in my and Duncan state and a lot of others, it is now legal. So let's move to let's say cocaine.
Okay.
Absolutely, the distribution of cocaine is something that comes with a lot of illicit activity and a lot of illegal stuff, a lot of harm, a lot of potential harm, all of that stuff. But again, and so the person who's distributing, yes, I do completely understand where the laws around that come from. But once that guy has taken the risk of procuring whatever and he brings it to my door, now he's inside my home.
Right.
The handoff happens inside.
Right.
Money or trade off inside. This is hypothetical.
No. Right. Hold on, you got to.
It happened inside, and so at what point am I putting somebody else at risk?
You are, because you're participating in it.
You're creating demand.
You're creating the demand. So as you participate, because
so change that though.
Well, this is the piece right here. It's like perfect example: sweatshops, blood diamonds, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks good on your lady's on her finger until you find out 1,000 kids had to die to mine that diamond, right? It's the same concept. Does it make it okay because we are oblivious to how it got here, right? Does it make it okay because the impact and the deaths and the crime needed and whatever else miserable lifestyle a person had to endure just so you can enjoy your fix and your high? Does it make it okay, right? So if I'm wearing,
well, I don't know if we're talking about okay. I don't know if we're talking about things are okay. We're talking about what's legal. We're not talking about morality here.
All right,
we're talking about the law.
You're right.
And
I'm making a moral.
I definitely agree with you that as somebody who may or may not procure illegal drugs from time to time,
right,
that I am participating in a system which absolutely creates violence, creates the potential for violence and a lot of different things.
Okay.
But again, going back to the notion of treating those things differently, and that was even your original idea to say that some crimes, or I think maybe even said the majority, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of crimes don't need actual police officers to be dealt with. So let me pose this question to you guys. Duncan, you mentioned your wife is a social worker. And I hear a lot on, I guess you would say in the abolish / defund / whatever the police circles that, we should be sending out social workers to some of these issues. Nathan, what you said not sending police out, but do you think specifically social workers are the answer to those situations?
Not at all.
Same.
Okay.
Not at all. I will say
I
that
agree.
I think social workers will be needed to follow up on
Mhm.
a lot of cases, but not when these things are happening. It's too dangerous. And social workers aren't going to do it. You know, I've worked with a lot of them doing this job for 13 years. They do have a skill set. There is a need for them. I would like to see social workers work on the preventative side before officers are needed to be called, not while officers need to be called. Those are two totally different circumstances. I need you present in these homes, working on these homes, or the dysfunction in the home, the dysfunction in communities. That's when we need the social workers, right? Before things blow up, right? These things,
Right.
what ends up happening is people call the police after things have gotten bad, after the crime has been committed. Sending a social worker out there to someone's house when the guy just put his hands on the lady or the lady just stabbed the guy, right, type of thing. Now, honestly, I know that's a stretch, but the whole idea is that there's no way to tell or determine how things are going to escalate. So sending a social worker is not going to cut it. One, majority of social workers are probably going to be women. They're not going to feel comfortable being in every situation alone without any type of security or protection. So realistically, for me, when I think about it from a practical standpoint, I think social workers will be phenomenal at following up after police officers have left a community or left a home or left a situation where there was trauma. You know, I think that's a piece that's missing. We don't follow up with citizens after we having violent or sometimes life-changing encounters with them. I think that is a problem because that does create trauma. That has I'm pretty sure it has an impact that we have not really maybe studied. I haven't seen much. I'm sure they've had studies on it, but it's not something that we talk about. So is social work needed? Yes. Are we utilizing them in all the capacities? No, I don't think so. I do believe officers are handling things that they should not handle, but then the question is who handles them, right? Society has used policing as a dumping ground for their issues, and that has to change. And so if officers, when people say defund the police, reallocate resources, trust me, the police are like, we don't want to do that shit anyways. So we're all on the same team. We're just saying who's going to do it, right? So what would be the answer? And when we talk about, when people say, well, send mental health, send the counselor. Yeah, all right, right. Okay, you say that until one of them are taking your head off too. It's not that easy. Yeah. It's absolutely not that easy. I think what ends up happening, what people really have an issue with, is that officers are relying on their gun instead of their hands, right? In situations where you can subdue a person with your hands, officers are not confident enough. They don't have the skills a lot of times. And they're always resorting on the fact that just because you can shoot a person doesn't mean you should shoot a person. Again, this all comes down to a training issue, but I think we just don't train officers long enough or well enough to deal with some of society's issues.
Yeah, and I would love to get into the training aspect. I know, Ryan, you've got a hard out. So
yeah, my dog is literally sitting here staring at me like I need to go to the bathroom right now. So I feel like just for the sake of not having a cleanup on aisle 5, I should probably bail. But the one thing I wanted to say is I think the social worker argument is a convenient but not nuanced enough argument. Like, yeah, somebody who has the skills of a social worker being put into some sort of crisis response role would be great, but it should be a separate role that someone is trained for and they take. I don't think we should go to existing social workers and say, hey, let's throw this on your plate as well, because anyone who knows a social worker knows they do not have the capacity for that.
Exactly.
So it's more nuanced than, hey, like this should be a social worker's job. This should be a function. What is currently a function of the police should be given to a different job, not necessarily an already existing job.
I definitely agree with that. Thank you so much for being part of this. I know we had the times kind of screwed up and you
it's my fault,
missed a whole bunch of stuff.
I got to say, Duncan and Nathan, I both appreciated so much what you both had to say. I've followed you both sort of creepily on my phone down here. So I'd be so down to do this another time, Lutch. I'm sorry I got to rush.
Yeah, right back at you.
Do you want the floor to shout out your plugs and whatever?
Sure. Yeah, sounds great.
All yours.
Thank you. My Instagram is @IDRYBlutch. That's where most of what I feel like putting out to the world goes out. the reason that Lutch and I know each other is because I wrote a book called Altar Boy to Atheist, Giving Up God, the gist of which is that I was a basically like hardcore youth group leader Catholic, and I now consider myself an agnostic atheist, which is a conversation for another day. But if you feel like reading a subpar book, feel free to pick that up. Otherwise, I got nothing else to plug. I'm just really grateful to be here, and so happy to meet a couple new friends, and I hope everyone takes care and has a good rest of the long weekend.
All right, brother. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks, y'all. I appreciate it. Take care.
Peace out. All right. So
I mean, I just want to jump in that social work comment. I mean, so I think far and away the most important thing with what I'm talking about is training the police on de-escalation tactics and overhauling their training and how they approach those situations. Furthermore, I think that the social work folks I would be talking about would be self-selecting, choosing to go through it, and they should go through more rigorous training than social work school that my wife did. But they as we've also seen sadly recently, sometimes police don't want to be there either. And so whoever wants to be there should be able to get there, and be a part of that de-escalation. But one thing I also wanted to echo that Nathan said earlier about sort of the lack of oversight and checks and balances. Really, when all's said and done, the only people defending people who are criminals or suspects are like a majority of the Supreme Court, which has historically been 5 white rich men who the Miranda rights. That's a Miranda versus Arizona Supreme Court case where no one's sticking their neck out for criminal defendants or suspects. It's not politically advantageous to do that. So the only check is the Supreme Court when they say, "Whoa, guys, you finally crossed the line. You got to tell them their rights." That's it. Like you at least have to tell them their rights. So that's just a tiny bit of a little bit of checks from 5 white rich men that protect criminal defendants and suspects. And that's so you need citizen boards, you need citizen oversight within police organizations. So
I definitely like that idea because I'm not a social worker, but I went to school for psychology, and so seeing the people that I graduated with, and then further seeing the people who stayed in school to actually get their psychology PhD or their PsyD or whatever, not really the type of people that you want in high stress situations. So yeah, I think having a separate role than police officer, but still under the umbrella of law enforcement would really go a long way.
A different agency or group, but that's just a response team to someone who's going through just an episode, a psychotic episode.
I would say too, and I like that idea of having a specialized unit under the umbrella of law enforcement, where if they're going to a mental health call, you guys, I've been to a lot of them. I've been close to almost having to shoot a few people, and the one case that I almost had to was an Army veteran, and I'll never forget it. And we had to subdue him, but luckily it was three of us there against one. We put a plan together. I said, listen, I go low, you guys go high. Someone get the arms, I'll get the legs. And this is how you're supposed to train. This is how you're supposed to handle these things. Talking about somebody who's unarmed. There is a way to do it, but if the officers are not trained properly, you guys, they end up relying on their gun. And that is the problem. Someone said, how long should officers be trained? I'm going to cover that real quick.
Please do. Duncan, So just to give it some frame, Princessa here says, how long should training be for a police officer? What should it entail? Should testing be strict?
Yes. This should be the hardest profession to get a job in, right? This should be the most difficult job to get hired in. And the requirements and standards need to be high. Right now, the expectations and standards are very low in this country to become an officer. By minimum, it should be at least 2 years. Absolutely 2 years to become an officer. That's more than enough time to get defensive tactic training. Again, a lot of officers aren't confident dealing with unarmed suspects or offenders. You know, they struggle. They struggle. We had one recently with a gentleman who got out of his car. He was unarmed. He wasn't listening to the officer's commands. The officer did have a legal reason to stop him. They get into a tussle for maybe 10 seconds and the officer's winded. He can't grab him. He doesn't know how to detain him. He doesn't know how to restrict his movements properly. Ultimately end up shooting the guy in the back of the head. And it's absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. And so people are just tired of that. But again, we live in a country where we have such low standards, and we give the most power to people who aren't deserving of it, who never earned it. So here we have a situation now, to Duncan's point, and it's a great idea. You have a unit within the police department. And again, I traveled with a non-lethal beanbag shotgun for situations that would require maybe an unarmed person or a person with a knife. And it's an appropriate scenario for me to use that beanbag shotgun. It hurts, right? It absolutely hurts. In situations like that, you go into a mental health call with someone who has non-lethal or less lethal weapons that they can use to detain a suspect. A lot of times, these mental health calls, a person is armed with a knife. I don't know why. It's either a knife, it's a bat of some sort, but they have something they can bring harm to you or themselves. And a lot of times they do attack the officers. They chase after the officers. But if you have enough space, enough distance, and you can stop them without having to use lethal force, it absolutely should be used. What's happening is departments don't have the tools. They're not paying for the tools. They're not paying for the training, or they can't afford the training, which is another problem. And therefore, we have citizens that are dying who should not have died. I believe that there's too many police officers' deaths or related deaths with citizens. Again, on average, we're looking at about 1,200 people die by a police encounter. And unfortunately, I truly believe we can reduce that by half with proper training. So to that question, 2 years, absolutely 2 years. There needs to be a substantial amount of time in training, understanding the law. And then there also needs to be substantial amount of training, physical and defensive tactics and combat. Again, I would bring some of these officers and trainers from Europe over here to the US and let them put together a program, because these guys are taking people down with knives, bats, and swords. So, and they're not shooting them. Why? Because they don't carry guns. The officers don't carry guns over there. So how are they over here they're using all type of Bruce Lee and all type of techniques on people without killing them all the time. With us, it's just so easy. It's so convenient. It's so easy to use this finger right here. Right. Our officers are winded. They're out of shape. They're ignorant to those same laws that they're supposed to be enforcing on others. They don't know them themselves. They're violating people's constitutional rights left and right. It's a shit show. It absolutely is. And so, you know, I'm all for the rights. And again, to Duncan's point, we absolutely need citizen review boards. Absolutely.
Well said. Well said. So before we dive any deeper into the training, we got another great question here from Princessa. Do officers need to handle people with special needs carefully or respond as they would normally? I would assume there's some type of protocol, but you know, how does that work?
There is no, well, it depends. The problem is if an officer doesn't know, the officer doesn't know.
Right.
And so unfortunately, there needs to be training on how to identify people with like Down syndrome, people who have, I forgot the names of them. There's one in particular where if you're not really knowledgeable, if you can't pick up on the cues, then you won't realize, right? There was a case where a guy was going through a seizure and the officer thought he was resisting arrest, and the officer was assaulting him even more. And again, the problem is you have officers who don't pay attention to certain clues. There's a difference between a person resisting arrest out of fear versus someone resisting arrest and trying to assault you as an officer. I know the difference. There was a time I had to arrest a lady. She had a warrant, and I knew she was hyperventilating. I knew she was going to be difficult. Ma'am, I need you to put your hands behind your back, right? And she's resisting because she's afraid and she doesn't want to go to jail. I'm not going to take my elbow and start beating her over the head, right? I'm not going to pepper spray in the face. I mean, I understand the situation. The problem is you have officers that have a hard time they have a hard time critically thinking and being able to distinguish between a threat and a non-threat. And so a person going through, shout out to Joe, going through a diabetic episode could look like they're resisting. There's passive and then there's active resistance. And again, if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention, then you'll end up treating a situation or escalating a situation where it doesn't need to be escalated as an officer.
Yeah. So we got somebody who's got we got Braze Club in here. It says remove all in power and reboot. You're going into an uphill challenge that you are not qualified for. A bachelor degree should be the least to become an officer. Pay for it yourself, not remove the guns from the police department with their flabby, tired asses. I don't know that I would characterize things that way as much as I am not I'm not a huge fan of the police. I think Dustin also here agrees. We've also got Kluke115 saying, speaking of violating constitutional rights, why do police have the authority to seize guns legally, brandishing their firearms at intruders like the McClaskeys or the McClaskey case? I think if I can, what's up, Gail? Yeah. I mean, I would assume that the notion has to do with not just having guns, but and I do believe that the McCloskeys were within their rights, especially in a stand your ground state. But I don't know. Do you have any deeper analysis, either of you? Again, we have.
Go ahead, Duncan.
I mean, I couldn't quite understand, why do police have the authority to seize guns legally? Why do they? I mean, so I think police have the legal authority to seize guns if they're imminently in danger of harming someone. Under like either the officers themselves. But I agree, it's different if it's a stand your ground state in your own home or in your curtilage, it's called. It's sort of your own, like your front yard. You can that's a very deep core American value that you can protect, your castle, that's your home. So I think if the officers have no reason to believe that those guns are illegal, I think people standing on their own property brandishing guns that the officers do not have probable cause to believe are illegal, I don't think they could take any action and seize those. But if they're outside their own home, my understanding is that they can, seize guns to protect the officers or the general public. And there's probably probable cause for some crime being committed when there's a gun sort of being, brandished out and it's not in someone's home.
Well said. Well, thank you for thank you, Princessa.
Yeah, let me add on to that real quick. He's right. The only time we can take the guns is when they've been used in a commission of a crime, or the guns themselves have been altered. Again, when we buy these weapons, there's rules, right? People need to know the rules. Like, you can't shave off the serial numbers and things of that nature. So, when you're buying these things, you're agreeing to these rules that have already been set in motion by the feds and things of that nature. So it's a part of the pay for play type. Well, I say pay for play. It's a part of the if you want to play and participate, then these are the rules you have to play with, right? So same thing with driving. Like, if you want to drive, you need a driver's license, right? So you agree that you're going to register the gun when you buy it, type of thing, or you're going to go through the checks and all that. So, but yeah, if there's any type of issues with that gun where it can't be identified, they can take that legal. We can seize that gun if the gun was used in a commission of a crime, or if it was used, and even if if it's used lawfully, we still take the gun, we'll seize it, send it for processing, and then we release it. It takes a while, but again, you get the gun back unless you're a criminal. Then you'll never get the gun back.
Interesting. So again, I know we could get into any aspect of this all night, and I don't want to keep you guys too long. So I want to. There's a couple of things that I specifically wanted to ask about. The thin blue line. This is something that I definitely understand, but I feel like it creates an obstacle for people who want to be good cops. The culture, I mean, again, as it seems, is such that you can't ever, you can't cross the thin blue line. And so when you see, again, to me, that means when you see your fellow officers breaking the law or just doing untoward things, that because you're in this fraternity of brotherhood, then it's your responsibility to have allegiance to them, versus enforcing, even if it's not, about protect and serve, and it really is just about enforcing the laws, good or bad. Well, now you're not doing that either because of this notion. How ubiquitous is this sentiment of the thin blue line, and how much does it affect the way that these good cops would deal with a situation with a not so great cop?
That's actually a great question. You're the second person who asked me on live, so let's discuss it. I think I'm gonna lay it out real good, and then I have to take my leave. I think first and foremost, this has been a great conversation. And I know we don't have a lot of time to go over, man, but I would definitely love to do a part 2, because there's a lot of questions I have for Duncan as well.
Oh, there will be.
All right, so let's talk about the thin blue line, and then I'll head out. But I think it's a great question. So I think the misconception that people believe is that they think it's like policing like this secret society, like it's just us against the world kind of thing, and it's not entirely true. It's not completely accurate. I always tell people that it's a family. It's just like a family. And we are a family. Unfortunately, you have some people, there's a sub layer to that. There's another layer that goes underneath this family. It's a layer, it's a darker layer. It's a darker layer of officers who decide they want to operate with impunity. They want to move and do the things they want to do. They want to go against their oath. And they all galvanize together, right? No matter what department you are, there's always might be 2 or 3, 4, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes the entire department. Roughly, unfortunately, what ends up happening, the thin blue line itself, the concept was always about representing law, representing the purity of justice amongst the things that are not just, right? The darkness on the outside and the blue line in the middle represented the thin line that we walk every single day to uphold the justice in this country, right? I think over time it's gotten a little, I guess you would say kind of stretched in different ways. But what has happened? The culture in policing has changed, right? What's happening within it is that you have one family that's outstanding. They're upstanding groups of people, and they work together to carry out their oath. Then you have a subgroup of officers who are the bad ones, right? They work together to not carry out their oath. And it's really just that simple. And unfortunately, there is a faction in a lot of police departments that are separate from those who are there to do just work. They're there to do good work. It's all throughout the criminal justice system, actually, right? You have corrupt prosecutors. You have corrupt people in the corrections division as well, working in the correctional department. There's corruption all throughout it. There's corruption in the sheriff's department. What is corruption at the end of the day? It's a lot of different things. It's everything outside of what their job is supposed to be, right? Anything illegal, anything that goes against their oath, you are then falling into corruption. It could be as simple as stealing candy out of the store as an officer. It could be something as egregious as assassinating people, right, for political reasons or for personal reasons. It could be something as egregious as being a racist, right? Being a white supremacist, being a KKK, being a drug dealer, being a gang member, and then joining the police force. It absolutely happens. It could be a prosecutor who gets paid off by a drug dealer. It absolutely happens. It could be someone in the correctional department sneaking in drugs and cell phones into these facilities. I know gang members and people who work for organizations that decide to do these jobs just so they can have that inside connection. So unfortunately, this is a part of society, and we need to find ways to root it out. So when we talk about holding police officers holding other police officers accountable, there are some departments that don't do a good job at it. There are departments that do a great job at it. Unfortunately, there are some city police departments that are more corrupt than others. It just is what it is. You can go in some areas in Florida where the police departments are very corrupt, right? They're very pro-police. It's us against them. They've lost their way. This is true. That's not every department. You have some departments like in Louisiana, New York. There's factions of some police officers in this big organization. New York and California, the Los Angeles Police Department, same thing, where you have a faction, maybe 3 or 4, sometimes 10 officers, maybe a narcotics unit within the department that's corrupt, that's dirty. This is very true. The real question is, we know it exists, but we also sometimes ignore the fact that there are great officers that also exist that create this counterbalance, because they're the ones that are holding them accountable. There are some officers that are afraid to hold other officers accountable, and there's some that are not, right? And so again, it's not so bad, though. I think that people believe that there are more corrupt officers than good officers. It's not true. The question is, why are they hard to scope out? Why are they hard to find? Is because a lot of times they don't do criminal acts in front of good officers. You know, people ask me all the time. I had never had a corrupt officer act corrupt in front of me. I'm at home one day, I get a phone call. Hey, guess what? You heard about John? He just got arrested. What? For what? I think
I know that dude. No,
I know him, right? What'd he do? He was stealing lottery tickets after a armed robbery at a gas station. They caught him on camera. He thought the camera's off. There was a second one that was still on. Caught him stealing a roll of lottery tickets. You can look it up. It's a real case. I said, why the hell would he do that? Right? I had another guy that I worked with all the time. He was getting paid by drug dealers to help them move drugs throughout the county, right? And it was over like 12, 13 officers, you know, within the metro Atlanta area, Atlanta, DeKalb, you know, they all got picked up by the feds for getting paid by drugs. And these are guys that I work with, kick doors open with, arrest criminals with, and they themselves were criminals. And again, you just don't know. You could be an amazing officer today and be a corrupt officer tomorrow. That's the dangers of the job. This is why you need citizen involvement. This is why you need transparency in order to help keep people honest. It is what it is, because power is very corruptive. And if you don't have a strong mental fortitude, you're done. You're easily swayed. If you're not good with your money, people can buy you off, right? Right? If you owe a lot of debt, people can buy you off. And so, you know, again, it becomes a thing about human nature. How do we set it up to where we highly discourage it? We also make sure the citizens have access to where they can also correct things before it gets worse. I would say this, though, in closing, you know, there's a famous, I won't say famous, but there's a quote on The Dark Knight, which I love the most. I think it's genius. And it touched me when I was watching. Me and my brother were in the theater watching it, and no one understood why I felt it was such a powerful message. And what did he say? They were talking about Harvey Dent, and, you know, why Batman felt the need to put all of the hatred on himself and not on Harvey Dent, because Harvey was looked at as the white knight of Gotham. And he said, you know, this rings very true to this day, right? You either, the quote is so dope. The quote is so dope. You either die being a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. You guys, there's so much truth to that. There's absolutely so much truth to that. And it's a very powerful statement. And a lot of people will never have this level of power in their lifetime, ever. And that's the problem. People are getting power. They have power, have access to power. They can use power, and they weren't worthy to use it. Power is not meant for everybody to use, right? Everybody's not qualified to access power, enforce power, and enforce power on other people. And unfortunately, we have the wrong people in position of power enforcing power on others. And there's why we have the problem. And if you don't have good checks and balances, if you don't have good oversight, then people are going to abuse it. And this is what we see today all throughout the criminal justice system. So the question is not, do we have corrupt officers? The question is, how do we actually weed them out and also protect those who are not corruptible from being corrupted?
Very well said. That might just very well be the question of the part 2 to this.
Part 2. That's what I like. I like that. I like that.
So are you dipping out?
I gotta run, brother. I gotta run.
All right. So let the people know where they can find you, all that
Absolutely.
good stuff.
Listen, you guys, please check me out on YouTube, on Instagram at Real Nathan Daley. You see the little highlight on, oh, it's on this side. You see the highlight on the on the wall there, you guys. Please check me out. A lot of great discussions over there. We have a lot of conversations about these topics and similar other topics as well, you guys. I would love to have you a part of this journey. Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited for the part 2, man. Just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming up. I really do appreciate you. Your thoughts in this conversation, because you really cannot get the perspective of a police officer just from watching videos or reading books or anything. So your perspective here is very much appreciated.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you again for having me, brother. Listen, I'm excited. And definitely got to get Duncan. Duncan, I got 100 questions for you, man. I got 100 questions.
right back at you. I feel like we just started.
Yeah, we did, man. It was. We're gonna get it together, and I definitely. I know it's wild. It's Memorial Day. I think everybody's all over the place. Shout out to those in armed forces. We appreciate all their service and to this country, to the people. Can't say that enough. Lutch, thank you for bringing me on, man. I'm looking forward to part 2. Definitely got to get Ryan and Duncan back, and we're gonna dive into this deeper. I think this is a great intro, though, to a very large conversation. It's a lot to uncover.
It is, and that's exactly why I want to start with something small, a very specific question. Especially I've talked to I haven't other than you, I've talked to everybody else one-on-one before. You and I just met. Nice to meet you. But I have we have a little bit of an understanding of where people fall in general on issues. But again, because this is such a very specific type of issue that isn't like your political affiliation doesn't necessarily dictate what you think about this. Correct. And we are just getting started. I think this was nice for us all to kind of get together and all become friends. Next time you get into it and shed some blood.
Facts. Love it, man. I appreciate you guys, man. Let me know, and you guys into the chat. Thank you guys so much for hanging with us tonight. And that's it, man. Until next time, man. You guys have a good night.
Peace out, brother.
Peace out. Right.
And then there were 2. So I'm if you got a heart out, let me know. But I am very happy to have this opportunity to speak to you one-on-one, especially being from Jersey. There is a specific type of interaction that I've had that I don't know how universal it is, but definitely dealing in especially with cannabis issues and with the New Jersey police, there definitely is some common understanding there. So I guess what kind of can you just talk a little bit about what kind of criminal clients you've had?
Sure. I mean, I've sort of, before I got into cannabis, I did as some pro bono work under the Obama administration. He had a program of commuting the sentences for non-violent drug offenders. So that was a really meaningful matter that I worked on, where I worked for a guy who was a low-level, henchman in a meth ring in Oklahoma. Wow. And really just sort of did it to support his habit. Never
not with meth, but
right. Yeah, exactly. A little more destructive habit. And he got 30 years, got busted. He never had a weapon or anything. And I think I got him at his 18th year. So we on Obama's last day, his sentence got commuted, so he was able to get out. But I mean, that's just insane. That the the sentencing guidelines have been terrible for drugs for a long time, which is a whole nother topic. But so I've worked with that, but now currently, working with clients who have been in the illicit market, unregulated market, black market, gray market, legacy market, whatever you want to call it, selling cannabis.
I like legacy market. That's got some esteem to it.
That's my preferred term. Some people laugh at that as sort of being a little too PC, but I think it actually, it was still a job. It was just, and one that was needed because of the demand, and just wasn't regulated for a lot of bad reasons, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, and a lot of my clients are continuing in that gray market now, even as they look to transition or start to transition into the regulated market. And as we've seen in California, if you don't do it right and you overtax it, overregulate it too much, that the black market stays alive and well. 2/3 of the volume, I think, in California is not regulated. So there's definitely issues with legalization, and because you're still dealing with that gray market. And I have people come to me all the time asking questions about how to do
Look who we've got here.
What's up,
Bip? This is a serious conversation.
Time asking questions about how to do
Oh, you got to turn that off.
Yeah, I didn't. Hey, it's like the watching the radio with the radio playing thing. Or
Gotcha.
calling in. Yeah, gotcha.
So so thank you for coming up and joining the panel, Mr. Jersey Shore. Why don't you quickly tell the people who you are?
Oh, I'm Duncan's client, so I figured I'd hop on and say hello, see how we're doing.
So let's get your thoughts on the question at hand. What role should the police play in society?
Safety. Safety is key there. I think that police should be around to keep people safe. If people are having a good time and they are, doing it safely, then that's that. And that's just kind of where I'm at on it, though. I fully and fundamentally believe that, the government really should not be in regulating what substances people put into their body. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think people should be out there consuming very dangerous substances. But if the government's role is to protect us from substances that are dangerous to our health, then what are these guys doing around? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They're failing us. So that's just where I'm at on that. I don't think that they should be sending police out there to regulate substances that people ingest. That's just where I'm at.
So I had just asked Duncan about some of the criminal clients that he had, and that it's because I've been there. I've been arrested for weed 3 different times, and luckily, I now have a clean record. But that very easily could have gone a different way. And I wonder if obviously, as a lawyer, you're not doing the stuff. You're representing people who are doing the stuff. But the perspective that you have is still quite unique. And yeah, Jersey all day. Again, getting back to the issue at hand, what do you think the cops who spend a lot of time on this, what do you think they could do differently that would still fairly represent what they're supposed to be doing? They are supposed to be arresting people who are breaking the law, and as stupid as we might think the law is, it's still a law. And so
correct.
Are you talking in cannabis or in other areas?
Just definitely with cannabis, but just with the laws in general.
I think with cannabis, they shouldn't be doing anything about it. It's especially right now. They're kind of not. There's not a lot of resources devoted to that.
We're all 3 of us here from Jersey, so we just got legalization this year. So we're
Right. So like in our nice little corner here, they shouldn't be doing anything. I think there's a better way to go about incentivizing people to come into the regulated market than sort of, I guess, people could argue that you need sort of a carrot and a stick. So you have an incentive to bring them into the regulated market, and then a stick sort of forcing them out of the illicit market. But I think with the limited resources that we have for, police departments and municipalities and counties and everything, there's money's better spent elsewhere when it comes to cannabis enforcement. And then just in generally, I think it is that training and discretion. I think so much of what Nathan talked about, I think, and what we all have sort of been discussing in these ideas, if we take care of all of that and maybe pay police more, that thin blue line, which I think comes from a place of, hey, we've all got each other's back, which is a good thing, doesn't manifest into, corruption. And so if we take, that's almost a symptom more than like sort of a cause in my mind. If we take care of all the other stuff we've been talking about, that corruption, I think will dwindle, naturally.
Absolutely. Again, we've been circling around, just the police officer aspect of a lot of this, but it's inarguable that the laws are not great, and that's how this whole discretion thing came up. Yes, we want the laws to be better, but they're not better right now, and so giving cops the I guess freedom, for lack of a better word, or the privilege, maybe I'll say privilege to use that discretion, is given to them. But the notion of training and how much training and all of that stuff, really gets in the way of that, because I would love, me personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but I would love to feel like the police were a force for good in society by and large. And I think that having a police department, or a police, not a police state, but having law enforcement the way it is better than, complete anarchy. But I think, anarchy could work if we build it from the bottom up. And with that being an ideal, obviously a utopian ideal, there's ways to build from the bottom up. And, we talk about community policing and hotspot policing. That type of stuff, I think, is really what will not only change how the optics of being a police officer is, but really change people's lives and change how maybe people who are more predisposed to getting into behaviors that are illegal, maybe that can really turn the tide for that large of a boat, because it's such a huge issue,
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a conversation we need to keep having, because the power is stuck in the status quo. The money is in the status quo, and so there's very little incentive to change until there's enough groundswell.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe departments are incentivized by federal funding, correct? So the department who busts the most drug dealers gets the most money for new equipment. I may be wrong about that, but I believe that that's the way that it works. And if so, then maybe this should be a talk that we're having on the federal level rather than the local municipal level on why would we be funding this? why are we paying to have these people go into the community and harass our neighbors and our friends? Could be a good place.
Yeah, I think again that gets back to the notion of what if the laws are bad, what do we expect the police to do if their job is to enforce bad laws? And I think that we really circled around this whole thing about discretion. That really I think the way I think ideally we would want a world where the laws are such that we don't need police officers to have to use their discretion, that the laws are clear enough that people know what they can and can't do, and people are willing to follow the laws for the most part because they make sense. And then the people who are actually breaking the law are, what we think of when we say a criminal or a felon or the stereotypical image of that. You're always going to have people who do bad things. But if we can change the consequences of some of the not so bad things, and then we can change how the people who are looking for those bad things look for those bad things, then I really think that we could, things can change.
Yeah, I mean that assumes our system of government in passing laws works, though, which is just unfortunately not very true.
Yes, definitely that is an
issue.
issue.
The game is inaction rather than action, and so it'd be like, yes, in a perfect world, our laws would exactly reflect our values in terms of, so there'd be no bad laws, but that would require a more perfect form of government than we found, I think.
I don't know if I agree, because I think that the type of government that we have is feasible, but I think and again, this is a whole other thing, but the way how involved people are and the way they get their information from the propaganda machines and everything, we have as a populace a lot of control over things, but there's just enough bullshit that makes people kind of go along with the go along with to get along, and they don't want to rock the boat, and they don't see where things can go wrong, and so it's just like, oh, whatever, it doesn't affect me directly, and so it is what it is.
But there's like things like universal background checks for buying guns that is like in the 80th percentile supported by the public, that there's just they can't pass that simple thing at the federal level. So that's where like the will of the people is not being reflected in the law.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes all the way down, because the federal government is representative. It's not people voting on this law and that bill and that bill. It's sending somebody else to give their opinions on that. And then so it falls back on us as the people taking accountability and say, okay, we voted this asshole who's not doing our bidding, and so we need to be more involved in all of that. I think I think this is a great a great introduction to this very deep hole that I would like to continue digging about. What are police for? What do they need to do? What can they do better? How are they? All that kind of stuff. And somebody smart always told me to always leave them wanting more. So I think this is a good place to stop part one. We will definitely be back with more and different questions. So Mr. Jersey Shore, do you want to tell people where they can find you if you want to be found?
At Jersey Shore Extracts on Instagram. We are currently in the process of becoming a licensed retail facility here in Jersey. Hopefully with the help of Duncan, we'll be able to accomplish that real soon here.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us here. And Duncan, same to you. Would you like to tell the people where they can find you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me at the Jersey Pot Lawyer on Instagram. I like to do silly reels and mix it in with some educational content. So hope you check it out. Hoping to.
They are very, very funny reels, I will say.
Thank you. And otherwise at IDRYBlutch.com, check out the firm and my talented colleagues.
There is also something, it's not very well organized, but there's a lot of information. If you are interested in, getting into the legal side of cannabis sales and stuff in New Jersey, if you look back on this channel, Duncan and I had a pretty in-depth conversation about, how to get started, what you need to do. He went through all the paperwork and all of that stuff. So it's a lot because there's a lot of details, but if it's something that you're interested in, it's all great information that you will definitely need to know. Thank you again, Duncan. I think this was, like I said, I think this is a great start, and it's only a start. We have much more to go over. We have much more to talk about, and the conversation's just begun. So we'll keep in contact and make sure that you are here for part 2.
Yeah, thanks, Lutch. This was awesome. So thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
You are very welcome. You have a good one.
All right.
All right. So, like I said, that is just the beginning. I wanted to start with this particular question of what role should police play in society? Try to say that 5 times fast. Because it is kind of a vague question, but at the same time, it's not. Like, what should this group, sanctioned by the government, what should they be doing? What is it that they are supposed to do? What did you say you do here? And it's not an easy question to answer. So I really appreciate everybody who joined me. I think I've gotten. I came into this thinking that I was going to be a little bit maybe adversarial with particularly Nathan, being a police officer, somebody who has been arrested a number of times for things that I definitely don't think I should have been arrested for, even though, the law, like we said, the laws are the laws. But it really gave me a perspective of, speaking. I don't talk to cops that often, and it's really easy to forget that anybody in any kind of group is, a person. And the idea of cops as a whole, or law enforcement, or the law, or the establishment, all of that stuff has always been so, just giving me a feeling, you're a cop. Some of the people that I know and like went to high school with and were doing stuff that cops wouldn't like, and then become cops. And it's like, well, what are you really doing? We were talking. I was talking in the group chat with these guys about how in the old days, back in the day, kids wanted to be cops because they wanted to help people. And that notion of that's what police do, I don't think it has changed that much. Because, police brutality, things going wrong in any aspect of policing has always been a thing. That's never not been a thing. But specifically in the eyes of a child, I don't even think that, your average, 3rd or 4th grader sees a police officer in most cases and sees them like in the same way that you would see a firefighter. And my instinct is to say, well, good, because they're not the same. One of you saves people and the other one of you ruins people. But it's just not that simple. When you want to answer questions very, very easily. Thank you, Kluk. I really appreciate that. It's never been publicly spread like this. I appreciate that. Social media is definitely a huge influence on this. And just there's entire YouTube channels of just police brutality videos after another. And if you're young enough where you weren't around before social media and all you know of cops, especially if you're, let's say, an affluent liberal woman, you're not really worried about interactions with the cops. If you get pulled over, you're worried about getting a ticket. You're not really worried about anything else. But you're online watching these cops do that and that because they're only catching the bad spots. Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate that. If that's all you're seeing, then it's going to affect how you view the heuristic of a police officer, in general. And I don't know that it's my goal to particularly change that, but it is my goal to help that from being appropriate, if that makes sense. I don't want us to live in a society where cops are bad people. I don't want to live in a society where we have to worry about cops and what cops are going to do and all that stuff. I mean, obviously, if you're a criminal, then yeah, you got to worry about it. But the worst thing I've ever done is, let's just say drugs. That's the worst thing I've ever done in my entire life. And 3 times I was arrested. I've been, months in court and, driving to not parole. What do they call it? Good thing I forgot already, but you know what I mean? Not parole. Somebody in the comments, not parole, but why am I blanking? I know it's there, but anyway, you know what I mean? Every month having to go in and see this guy, and almost like I was a child. That is one of the biggest things about the legal system, is how infantilizing it is. And again, I kind of understand it, but me knowing that I'm just a normal dude who got caught smoking weed, to be treated like I can't be trusted to walk from here to there without doing something crazy. It's such it's just infantilizing. And I'm so glad I have all of that behind me. But I don't know. Again, I don't know if that was all relevant. And yeah, same thing. Probation. There we go. Brain fart. But yeah, a free ego. Same thing. Every month, got to go in and be talked down for hitting the Mary Jane. I was on probation for 2 years, and it was just weed. It was a joint at a concert. I was going into MSG. Story time, real quick. So I was going to an Above and Beyond concert at Madison Square Garden. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'll just tuck a couple joints in my sock. I'll get in, I'll be good. It's it's electronic music. It's a trance show. Of course, they're gonna everybody's gonna be doing their thing there. And I was like, oh, this is a super special show. I don't want to just print out the ticket. I want to get a hard copy, like in the old days, like the actual ticket, so I could save that as a souvenir. Remember that. So I go in, I take the train from Jersey to Madison Square Garden, go in, go through security, and I'm good. I'm in. I'm like, yeah, all right. And the dumbest thing I ever did was take those joints out of my sock and put them in my pocket. So then I go up to will call to get my hard copy ticket. And they're like, oh, you're in the, they're in the, I know. Well, I would have been fine. But I went to the will call window to get my ticket. I had to have my souvenir, and they're like, "Oh, your floor seats, not on the mezzanine, right?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, that's the other side of the building. You got to go outside and go through that door." I'm like, "Oh, okay, no problem." And so I walk out of the building, and on my way walking around, I'm like, "Oh shit, I have these in my pocket." So I'm like, "Oh, okay." I don't need to smoke that bad, and I mean I don't need to smoke that bad. But so I'm going to walk on the other side, and I'm thinking, oh wow, my dad doesn't know about this. So Dad, if you're watching, yeah, I got arrested in New York one time and spent like 35 hours in jail, and I didn't tell you because I didn't want to bother you. But I was walking to the other side, and I realized, oh no, I still got these in my pocket. So I think I'm being super slick, and I kind of like look like I'm on my phone, and I go behind this little bush, and I bend down to put the things back in my sock. And as I'm looking up, there's 2 dudes beelining for me. Now, if you're in the drug world, if you see 2 dudes coming at you, the first thing you'd think is, oh, these motherfuckers about to rob me. So I'm like, oh shit. And I go to run, but the dude grabs me and he's like, hold on. And he flashes a badge. And funny enough, I was happy to see the badge, because as much as I did not want to be arrested, I certainly did not want to be robbed and shot or anything like that. But super excited for this concert. And I was in the studio, or I was in the stadium. I was inside. But because not only did I not follow the golden rule of make sure you are past everything and you are in the venue before you untuck whatever you've got, and also caring too much about a stupid paper ticket, and I didn't get to see the show. Luckily, I like I said, I was in, I live in Jersey, and it was in New York. So this was a Friday night, and I go in, and I'm assuming I definitely did a free ego. I screwed myself. There's nobody to blame but myself. It was so stupid. But luckily, even though I spent the 35 hours behind bars, because it was at an electronic trance show, I got rounded up with a bunch of other, affluent white electronic music listeners, and and I mean, it was what, like 2015, something like that. So these are the EDM bros, and so that's who I was with for most of the time that I was behind bars. If I wasn't in a solo cell, I was with a bunch of other weenie ass kids. So could have been worse, but that was not a fun 35 hours. But yeah, so that is part one of what should police be doing in society, or as I labeled here, what role should police play in society? If you haven't already, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe, because this is only part one, and we didn't even have everybody come in. So we've got more people who are going to be offering their thoughts on this exact thing. And the next time, we're not going to do the same exact question. I'm going to use a different question. I think I'm going to go into maybe specifically the training, because I definitely, we all agreed that the training is not good, and that more training needs to be the standard. So something like that. I don't know exactly when it will be, but I certainly will blast it out everywhere. So make sure you follow me on social media here at IDRYBlutch, and I'll have yeah, you like that? That's definitely what we're gonna do. Yeah, give me a follow. Make sure you subscribe so that when I do go live, you can see it and be here for all the goodness. I would really, really appreciate if you enjoyed this. There are some support links in the description. It is not cheap to do this, but it is absolutely free to like, to leave a comment, to subscribe, to share it with your friends, all of that good stuff. But even if you don't want to do any of that, you just want to sit at home and think about how awesome I am and how great this show is, you can do that too. Closing thoughts. Trace, I think your name is. Sorry if I am very bad with names, but if the training is going to be longer and more rigorous, there still has to be enough incentive for people to, I guess you mean, want to join the force. And you're absolutely correct. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we are going to get into. So again, make sure you subscribe. Thank you guys so much. I was actually pretty nervous about this stream. If you're not aware, I assume most of you are Nathan Daley fans, but he is quite a bit bigger than I am. And being an actual police officer, and not being too fond of police officers in general, and then having Duncan here as an actual lawyer, I didn't know if I would be like, I don't really know what's going on. You guys talk. But I think we did have a really poignant conversation and asking hard questions. And, I just want to have those conversations that nobody else is having. And even if somebody else is talking about it, if they're not digging in and really asking the questions and saying the things that need to be said, that I'm okay if I say something and Nathan doesn't like it and Nathan gets angry, because I respect Nathan and Nathan respects me, and we can have that conversation, and he doesn't have to love everything I say. And so this was the first time he and I talked. Everybody else I had talked to somewhat before, but this was as civil as you're ever going to see in IDRYB Live. Usually we are yelling and screaming, and I make sure to keep it civil. There's no name calling or anything like that. But when you get passionate about stuff, you get passionate about stuff. So make sure to tune in for that. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this stream. Don't forget, I've got a podcast coming out on Wednesday called God and the 12 Nights, about a fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, Egyptian book. It's all in there. I just dropped the preview for that today, so go check out where I judge the cover by its book, as they say you're not supposed to, and read the back of the book. And the interview will be on Wednesday. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Once again, please don't forget to hit the like button on your way out. I am out of here.